All the way from Camberwell in South London. A bit of a monster flight the other day, but I do believe you're doing okay now. Mr. Code 9. All's been well with you, my friend?
Everything is good. Everything is good.
Apart from those 4 a.m. wake-ups, though, are a bit of a shaky one.
Yeah, I'm not altogether here. Part of me is.
Well, I think probably the best way, I mean, you know, over the last kind of, I don't know, I guess the last 10, 15 years of this whole evolution of what's been known as the UK hardcore continuum, we've seen so many, you know, incredible forms of vibrant music burst forth and then split off into all these little different subgenres and everything. And obviously with the whole evolution of, thank you very much, Marnie, of this whole thing that, you know, started emerging around about, you know, 96, 97, the whole garage thing. There's been so many variants and what have you. And the one that's been winning favour in recent years, not just in London, but all across the world now, is this thing known as dubstep. And I'm sure a lot of people already in this room have heard many tracks of this genre. A lot of them are even making it. But for those that haven't, should we have a little bit of an example of this thing?
Yep. This is a bit crackly. It's a dub plate of a remix I did of a reggae band called Massive. So it's a relatively good way to introduce the sound, I think.
How old is this tune? We should really be asking you for the rewind on that one. It's some pretty heavy business. Once again, what was the name of the artist that originally did that track?
I think they're called Massive. The track's called Find My Way.
Right. So they're not they're not in particular a group that you're closely tied with. Your approach to do the remix?
I think they're from. I'm not sure where they're from actually. I was approached by someone in Holland to do the remix.
I mean, the first thing that people must notice when talking to you, my good man, is the accent. You're not originally from London.
Yeah.
Where was home once upon a time?
I grew up in Glasgow in Scotland, and I've lived in London for about eight or 9 years. Yeah, I basically got drawn to London because of pirate radio. People used to send me tapes, old jungle tapes in particular. When I got to London, I used to DJ jungle. When I got to London, I started playing UK garage. And so I've always just followed that mutation of London-based hardcore continuum music.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, you know, it was mentioned before, but this whole, I mean, you read it in a lot of blogs, this whole notion of the continuum, the nuum. Can you explain a little bit further this whole notion?
Yeah, I suppose it's what happened when acid house in the UK collided with Afro-Caribbean music culture in London in particular. So it's dub, reggae, and dancehall. And when these collided, you got, in the early 90s, hardcore, and then, most importantly for me, jungle, 93, 94, drum and bass, UK garage, grime, and currently grime and dubstep. So it's really, the hardcore continuum is a way of understanding that evolution of musics, because they're all kind of similar in a way, all different speeds, but at the same time, coming from a similar place and always using pirate radio as a media platform, because these musics don't at least initially get a lot of mainstream media coverage. So what's interesting about them in a way is that they're musical genres, but at the same time they come with their own media. And like with grime just now, they come with their own DVD and mixtape culture as well. So.
I mean, when you talk about this kind of, this continuum of hardcore and what have you, I mean, obviously at any kind of dancehall-based gig, you've got a vibe, but there's always been a certain electric vibe with, obviously, what's happening with hardcore and then with jungle and everything. I mean, are you finding that same kind of electric vibe that, say, was happening at nights, say the AWOL kind of thing in the mid-90s at jungle gigs, that you're finding them at dubstep nights now?
I suppose more so. No, the music, dubstep started as a kind of little subgenre of UK garage, the more instrumental side and the more reggae-influenced side of UK garage. And so I've been playing that abroad for about 6 years, and I played to lots of tiny crowds in my time. It's only in the last year or two that it's really started picking up. And the dance floors are full, and the vibe is much better, and it's spreading.
We'll go a bit further into that in a second, but just to kind of give people an idea about, where you've kind of come from and your upbringing. I mean, tell us about Glasgow. I mean, first of all, just as a city, man, what's Glasgow all about?
It's pretty industrial, kind of friendly place.
Musically, was it a very inspiring place?
Not particularly, not for me. It rained a lot. That can be quite inspiring, I suppose. But I don't have a lot of Scottish musical influences. No.
And when you talk about being fed kind of pirate radio tapes, for you, what were the shows, and in particular, who were the DJs that, when the tape turned up in the mail, it was like, yeah, can't wait to get that in the player?
I used to get loads of tapes of, I think it's Rude FM, from East London. I can't remember specific DJs, but I used to, when I was living outside London in about '95, I used to come down religiously every Sunday to go to Metalheads. And that's, I suppose, that period, '94 to '97, when there was everything from Ragga Jungle right through to the Metalheads type stuff, and it all existed. Didn't necessarily get played in the same clubs, but you could buy it all and you could mix it all, and that was kind of exciting for me, because it was the first time I'd experienced a kind of music which potentially integrated every single kind of music I'd ever heard on one kind of speed or one kind of set of rhythms.
When you kind of go back to the kind of the first traces of this thing known as dubstep, a lot of people reference LB, and it kind of seems that a lot of guys like LB and Steve Gurley were they were checking out Heads, and kind of more that digital, photech, kind of moody vibe would you say that played quite a bit of influence, a large part in influencing those guys?
I think because Steve Gurley used to be in Foul Play, so there was direct jungle linkages, and I think definitely the early dubstep stuff was coming out of really I suppose the Metalheads related side of drum and bass, and a lot of people in dubstep now are everyone went through that jungle thing at various stages. A lot of people in the scene were maybe between 10 and 15, but one way or another, whether they were listening to tapes at school or whatever, one way or another, that's in their blood or it's in their genes.
I mean, it's interesting to know. I mean, in the middle of the 90s, especially in the UK, I think the whole jungle explosion took so many people growing up. It just was all consuming, and for a lot of people, they got to a point where it was just like they kind of got fed up with this whole genre. At what point in time were you just like, I mean, obviously so deep into this music, and then you were just like, nah, this is what's happened here?
Yeah, I mean, with jungle and drum and bass, I was so immersed in it as a listener. And music, like any drug, stops working at a certain point. And for me, it stopped working when I started realizing that, without thinking about it, I was buying the same record. And it was taking my money for no reason. So I suppose I completely lost control by that point. So that must have been about 97, 98. And then I started hearing some of the early two-step stuff, the stuff with the big bass lines and the kind of reggae.
More like the rip groove kind of.
Yeah, I wasn't really into the speed garage thing. I've never been a huge fan of 4/4 music. So when the speed garage thing started to rhythmically break up and become a little bit more intricate and jungle influenced, not just in the bass lines but in the rhythms. So it's kind of the early Dem 2 stuff.
Have you got anything on your computer here? Maybe this might be a bit of a far cry, but have you got any jungle stuff on your computer?
I don't have any. Jungle's my biggest influence, and I haven't got any with me.
Yeah. Have you got any early two-step stuff there? I'm putting you in the spot a bit here.
I could play an early Horsepower thing. So this would have been about 2000. Here we go. Here's an LP thing. This would be about 2000.
So, should it be noted that dubstep DJs, they don't kind of have that fervent thing that jungle DJs had of all your tunes must be only a week old at the latest?
Oh, we've got that. We've got that. Yeah, it's a quite an intense dubplate culture. Yeah. Again, so it's inherited that, I think. There's a tune called Buck and Berry.
So again, that is Horsepower Productions?
No, that's LB.
LB, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. So and Buck and Berry is the name of the track?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so I mean, obviously you'd spend a bit of time commuting from Glasgow to London to go to parties and what have you, but when you first moved there and were living there, I mean, what was London like for you? Pretty easy to all of a sudden get involved into music, or?
It's a pretty intense city. Yeah, my first involvement in music in London was I set up a website called Hyperdub, which later became my record label. And Hyperdub was a kind of web magazine where I quickly became a journalist and interviewed everyone, all the producers that I was interested in from the last 5-6 years. So people like Lemon D and Dillinger, American hip-hop producers like LP, German dub, kind of electronic dub producers like Jan Jelinek, and then all the early dubstep producers, LB, Horsepower, but also people in UK Garage at the time, Miss Dynamite, and we kind of followed that through right up to Dizzy Rascal, Wiley, and later, 2003 or 4. And then when we started the label in 2004, I didn't have any time, so I kind of trashed the website.
I mean, was the website quite a bit of a focal point for people that are interested in this kind of a new stem of bass culture, if you will?
Yeah, because I think it was kind of unique in the way it brought all those kind of bass musics together. And it was also really the main place to find out about that side of UK Garage, not just in that kind of press release style of interview, but in kind of quite in-depth interviews. So it provided a bit of background that didn't exist in other media platforms at that point.
And also, to a certain degree, did it help you with, I don't know, I wouldn't say gaining acceptance, but all of a sudden it's just like, I don't know, you meeting all these guys and hanging out with them and then realize, right, this guy's on the level, so it wasn't such a close-knit thing anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it was tiny at that point, so it wasn't exactly difficult to kind of meet the people that are involved in it, because there was only a handful of producers and DJs playing that sound specifically. And then pretty quickly I started doing pirate radio on Rinse FM in East London. And when I started, I was doing the show after Roll Deep on a Tuesday night. And it was kind of weird because they don't usually have Scottish people on East London pirate radio. So I didn't talk for the first few months. I just used to bring lots of jingles. But yeah, that's how it kind of happened.
And I mean, was there a bit of a focal point as well for the music? There was a record store called Big Apple in Croydon. Tell us a bit about this place.
Yeah, Croydon is I suppose the home of dubstep. And Croydon's like for people that don't know, it's like a small city right at the south of the south part of London, and it's kind of grim. I've heard people describe it as the Detroit of England. I'm not sure that's accurate, mainly because I haven't been to Detroit, but it's kind of grim, and I suppose you can hear that a little bit in how dark some of the music is. But there was a record shop in Croydon called Big Apple, staffed by one of the early dubstep DJs called DJ Hatcher. And that shop worked as a kind of hub for the music. Horsepower were from Croydon as well. Benga and Scream, who are big producers in dubstep just now, but at the time were like 14, 15, 16. And I suppose latterly, probably the core of the dubstep scene now revolves around a night called DMZ, and these producers called Digital, Mystics, Lofa, and Scream, and they're, again, from that kind of area of South London that's quite near, or just north of Croydon.
I mean, at what point did kind of, you know, with grime and dubstep, they start noticeably branching off? And when did this kind of word dubstep first kind of start making an appearance?
Well, they both came from UK Garage. Grime really came out of the MCE side of UK Garage, So Solid Crew, Pay As You Go crew. And dubstep came from Steve Gurley, LBE, Zed Bias, that kind of baseline side of Garage. And they kind of went off in their own directions in a way. But they were all I suppose they were all featured on Rinse one way or another. So Rinse kind of held them together as latter forms of UK Garage, which eventually became their own thing. So they're kind of two separate scenes now, but there's a number of people who occupy some kind of space in the middle, right, such as Plastic Man, Plastician, who comes more from the grime side of things, but kind of dabbles in dubstep, and I'm kind of the opposite way around. I come more from dubstep, but dabble in a bit of grime now and then.
I mean, is it very much it seems like a bit of a regional thing as well, like, you know, the grime...
It's just South and East London, so
East.
I tend to think people from London can be very infatuated by their local area, and as an alien to London, as an outsider, I kind of have a slightly different perspective. So I'm not too fussed about playing stuff from East London and South London, because it's like 4 miles away. It's not a big deal for me.
I mean, you know, you mentioned it before, and it's been said many times over the years about the role of pirate radio when it plays. But just to give people an idea, just how important has pirate radio been in, you know, getting dubstep out there, and in particular, while this end of the Newham, if you will.
I mean, literally the way it has worked in the last year or so is that there's a number of DJs on Rinse FM, and occasionally when things are working properly, that pirate station is streamed online. If it's not, people record it. People record your show immediately after it's gone out live to the local area, and there's a website called bearfiles.com, which is this huge archive of grime and dubstep radio shows. And that kind of connection between the local pirate radio station and a web archive of all the mixes has kind of been quite an amazing fuel injection to how the music has spread. How
about internationally as well? I mean, a lot of people via, so via that website in particular.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. I mean, you know, well, you talked about it before with the DMZ thing, and I mean, every scene historically has an epicenter, be it like Paradise Garage, be it Blue Note, be it Co-op for, you know, what's happened with the Broken Beat thing. But there was a night called Forward, and that played a very vital role in the rise of dubstep. Yeah,
that was the original dark garage night, in a way, from about 2001. It was every 2 weeks on a Thursday. Started on a Sunday night at the Velvet Rooms on Charing Cross Road, then it moved to Plastic People in Shoreditch in East London, which is really, it's a tiny little club, but it's got an amazing sound system. And I think the thing about dubstep is we've kind of been spoiled with sound systems. We've got both Plastic People, where Forward is now every Friday night, and DMZ, the sound systems, which is at Mass in Brixton. The sound systems are just like as you'd want them to be for bass music. In other words, they're not just clear sound systems, they're very physical experiences. Everything is vibrating. Things are sliding across surfaces. The whole place is vibrating, and dubstep doesn't really work unless everything is shaking.
Right. I mean, what's the vibe like in these kind of, you know, at the Digital Mystics night and this? Is it? I get, from what I'm told, it's like you pretty much got no lighting in there. It's just dark, and it's just...
Yeah, we're not really into lighting. We're into dark rooms and everything vibrating. It's very stripped down, minimal and simple like that. It's about the sound.
And whereas the grime thing has to a certain degree been very much about the MCs, like you mentioned before, dubstep is not so much. I mean, do you find MCs at these nights at Forward, or?
Yeah, I mean, Forward has always had a bit of a mixture of grime and dubstep. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll hear a grime MC on dubstep, and vice versa. But the MCs in dubstep tend to be hosts more. Just keeping you company in the music, with the music, alongside the music. At the same time, the stuff that I do is a bit strange for dubstep because I work with a vocalist called Space Ape.
How long have you been working with him for?
Since 2003.
Right.
The first release that we did, it's kind of weird.
Should we have a listen to it?
Yeah, it was a cover of Prince's Sign of the Times. And let me dig it out.
You got a nice play on words with this one.
Yeah, so the tune's called Sign of the Dub. And it hasn't got any beats in it at all. I think I've got it. Actually, it's on the laptop. So this is kind of the degree zero of dubstep. In other words, it's just bass and effects and vocals. The vocal is more in a kind of dub poetry style. It's not that. So this didn't really fit in anywhere.
So, how about did you meet Space Ape?
He was just an old friend of mine. And so that was the first track we did together, so it was a quick thing, like half an hour. It's like how he'd never done any vocals before, so I was like, how do you get him to do vocals quickly, to somewhere to start? So I was like, what's your favorite track? Prince, Sign of the Times. Go and get the record. You got the record. Where's the lyrics? There's the lyrics. Read the lyrics. I'll just put down a quick bass thing with some effects. Boom. Pitched his voice down a bit. Yeah. That's that.
And what was the initial reaction to the tune? People were a bit dubious on it, or?
It doesn't really fit in anywhere.
Right. But obviously the tempo was fine to play in sets, but
people, I mean, it wasn't deliberately like this, but people heard it as some kind of connection to Berlin dub people like Rhythm and Sound. And also at that time, 2002, 2003 in grime, there was a thing called the Devil Mix. People like Wiley were making these tracks that were just bass, no beats in them at all, that MCs would spit over. So some people made connections to Berlin dub, some people thought it was some connection to these devil mixes in grime. Right. It's just random, really.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously someone else who came through a little bit later but ended up on your label, there's an obvious, well, it seems like an obvious connection there, is Burial. Tell us a bit about Burial.
Yeah, Burial was like a guy who kind of got in contact with me when I started the web magazine, because he was really into that side of UK Garage. And he's been sending me tunes for about 4 or 5 years. And I put out a 12-inch of his last year. We just pressed up 500 and he sold quite quickly, so that was cool. And then he kept sending me stuff, and his stuff kept getting better, so I was like, this clearly, the man should put out an album. And so we put out the album around about May, and it's been quite, I mean, for that kind of music, it's been quite staggering, the feedback that we've had about it and how well it's sold. And it's, again, it doesn't really fit in anywhere. It's definitely at a tangent from what dubstep is. Yeah. But it sounds kind of vaguely reminiscent of particularly Pole from Berlin, but with a lot of UK Garage syncopations and also quite dark and melancholy.
I mean, you know, one thing you kind of touched on before is, I mean, with the whole thing with, I don't know, a lack of MCs so much, or MCs being more hosts at dubstep nights. I think one of the biggest problems that happened with drum and bass especially was, you know, with MC-led nights, music became more about rewinds, how many rewinds can you get, and all of a sudden producers were making tunes that all of a sudden revolved more about a heavy impact drop than just actually constructing a tune. I mean, do you agree that it's something that possibly is happening with grime, and you know, there's a correlation between the MCs and that kind of style of production?
Generally, I really like MCs. I like playing with MCs. A lot of people in dubstep are kind of instrumental music. This is what it's about. I'm not really like that. I mean, everybody's got their own theory about, if anything, what went wrong with Django and drum and bass, and you know, there's 50 different theories around. My thing is just it didn't do anything for me anymore. So I certainly, my issue wasn't MCs. If anything, my issue was that it just went really, like a certain side of it took over, the side that was very gnarly, noisy, and aggressive. And rhythmically really stupid, like really simple and boring. And when you consider where Django came from, it's the most rhythmically exciting music I've ever heard in my life. And it could end up like that. It's just kind of, it's a weirdness. Yeah.
I mean, for so long, so many producers and people talked about the fact that maybe, you know, and Fabio touched on it yesterday in his lecture, you know, the fact when the music is 175 BPMs, there's not much space to breathe. And if the music was slowed down and you had a little bit more space to breathe, then it could inject so much new life. Do you think kind of dubstep, to a certain degree, offers that, is a bit of the solution of that?
I think it's definitely a counterbalance to where drum and bass went, get faster and faster, going towards GABA. And just by not only being around 140 BPM, but also being, a lot of stuff now is half step, so it actually feels even slower than that. It definitely, you know, it's drawn a lot of people away from drum and bass, and it definitely is a kind of counterbalance to the way drum and bass evolved. I remember interviewing Lemon D and Dillinger in about 2001, and they were moaning about how fast everything was getting, and said they were going to do stuff at 150. But I think, you know, it's like the peer pressure of the dance floor, what drugged up ravers crave, demanding, is so overwhelming a pressure for these guys who are earning their living from it that I haven't heard many people that have tried to slow it down, really. Well, not really.
If anything, it's getting even faster. Yeah. I mean, you know, another thing that's kind of interesting is there's always been this, you know, with kind of subgenres kind of all of a sudden getting split off into microgenres, and you kind of say this half-step thing there. Are you starting to see, even within dubstep, there's kind of new little, I don't know, side genres popping up? And what exactly is half-step, and do you have an example of that?
I mean, for me, dubstep is lots of different rhythmic styles. I think half-step is one of the most simplest style. Leaves lots of space. There's lots of space in the mix, which for me is perfect for having MCs. I mean, it sounds a little bit like instrumental grime. The production values are slightly different. The sub-bass is much stronger. So it feels quite slow. I'll play you a track that I did with Space Ape that is kind of a half-step thing. And the thing with half-step is the bass that drives the music along as opposed to the drums, because the drums are quite sparse. This is a track called Backward from earlier this year. So it's actually kind of weird because it feels slow, but actually people go off to it, big style in a dance.
So they're not actually dancing on the half, they're more.
No, it's almost like they're imagining that it's fast music. They're adding in the double time.
Kind of like the same thing with what people were doing with jungle to a certain degree.
the opposite of what they were doing with jungle. Like with jungle, you had the slow dub reggae bass lines, and you had double time breaks. And here, it's almost like with dubstep, the double time breaks have been subtracted, and so it's actually quite sparse and almost sluggish. But because people dance double time to it, or with people that are really locked into it anyway, there's a lot of lazy skanking going on. But people that are properly locked are dancing double time. It's kind of weird to watch because it is quite slow music.
Yeah, right. I mean, are there many other producers doing half step at the moment?
Yeah, probably the best half step producer in a way. They're like the prototypical half step sound is a guy called Lofa. He's just got huge brick walls of bass and very, very sparse, minimal rhythms.
And one thing I was going to ask as well is it kind of seemed when grime kicked off, you had a lot of very young producers, and what allowed for the kind of growth of the music, there was so much coming out, was the fact that all these young kids had easy access to very basic software like Fruity Loops and what have you. I mean, for example, what would your production setup look like? And are there still a lot of people producing on Fruity?
Yeah, I think a lot of the kids are still, I mean, Scream, who's going to be here in a few weeks, I think he still does most of his stuff on Fruity, and the stuff that he gets out of Fruity is amazing. I used to use Fruity years ago, but I've been producing for ages, so I pretty much use anything but standardly Reason and Logic. I don't think it really matters what software you use. I mean, Scream in particular is kind of the best example of why it doesn't really matter. You can if you can get what he gets out of Fruity Loops, then that's cool.
Yeah. And obviously, with very bass-heavy music, I mean, a good set of monitors an essential part of your kit, or?
Yeah, that's kind of standard. I mean, the hardest thing with this music is kind of referencing what it sounds like in the studio to what it sounds like on a huge sound system, with all music really, and it's very easy to overdo the bass in your studio, and we all get our dub plates cut at the same place in South London, and they describe a place called Transition. And they describe what they do sometimes as bass management, because often they're just having to mold the bass, like hold it back a little bit or bring it out or just control it a little bit so it works. It works on a big system effectively. And they've been cutting dub and reggae for ages. They did jungle, and now they do most of the dubstep stuff.
Well, it's kind of interesting to know. I mean, with what's happening now, with the technology that's available, and pretty much every single other genre of music, everyone's gone in the direction of your Serato, and drum bass DJs were pretty much the last bastion to a certain degree of dub plate culture. Yet it seems that whole culture is so alive and well in dubstep.
It is. I mean, it's very strong in dubstep. I'm certainly not anti-digital stuff, but I prefer the sound of vinyl. I like the sound of dub plates. I don't mind a bit of crackle in my music, because dub plates only last for 30 or 40 plays, so quite quickly you start getting crackle. And I think it's a kind of useful way of building a sound. If a handful of producers are all cutting dub plates, in other words, they're all getting mastered at the tracks are getting mastered at an early stage before they come out, so that immediately creates a level playing field. So when you hear the stuff out, you can compare it to what other producers are doing, because it's all gone through the same mastering process. So I think it's been quite useful for people trying to build their sound up, building from nothing really, like inventing what is a new variant of this hardcore continuum that we talked about.
I mean, for drum and bass, there was Music House. Where is the spot for dubstep?
Transition. It's in Forest Hill in South London.
Right. I mean, what about the cost side of things? I mean, obviously, cutting plates is economically it can stack up on you.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's in it for the love. So it's £30 to cut a 10-inch dub plate, 2 tracks, £50 for a 12-inch, and yeah, there's some real maniacal dub plate cutters who just like spend so much money doing it, but nobody's particularly making a lot of money out of it. But everybody seems quite happy to put money into their sound. So that's kind of the way things work.
So say, for example, someone got booked to play at Ford and they turned up with their CD wallet, they'd probably...
No, people do play with CDs, but especially on a sound system like Plastic People's, which is such a beautiful sound system. The sound is so clean and the room is cool. You really, like, CDs just hurt your ears in there. It's very toppy, and the sound is very sharp if you come with CDs. I don't think it has to be like that, but I think, you know, maybe that's one of the downsides of people doing stuff on Fruity and then going straight to CD without any mastering in between.
I mean, are you also getting this element of kind of VIP culture as well, where you'll do special one-offs for maybe yourself or for close friends or DJs? Or?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, when you can cut a dub plate, make a tune and cut a dub plate in one day, then, you know, people do all kinds of little different versions for different occasions. But there's not a lot of money in the scene, so it's not as if everybody's doing specials. People are generally quite happy to just cut their tunes.
I mean, going back to your own productions. I mean, how does the process work for you? I mean, do you start with just some beats, or you kind of work around a sample, or?
I wouldn't say there's a particular formula. Usually I'll hear a piece of music and something will stay with me, and I'll only notice it 3 weeks later that I'm humming this tune, and then often the way it works, because I've got a melodica and I'm a big Augustus Pablo fan, and I can't play any instruments, so a melodica is kind of cool for me because I can work out tunes relatively quickly while being nowhere near a computer. So I'll work out a tune and then play it take it to the computer, play it on a MIDI keyboard or whatever. So that's a way I've made a few tunes like that.
And on average, how long will you spend on a tune?
The first tune I played was like a day. The very first tune I released, that one without beats on a dub, was a couple of hours. Yeah. Some tunes take weeks. Again, there's no kind of set rule.
Yeah, right. I mean, in recent times, you've been working hard finishing your album. Tell us a bit about the album.
Yeah, the album's called Memories of the Future, and it should be out in a couple of weeks. And it includes 4 or 5 of the early Hyperdub releases, and lots of new stuff. And it's all myself with Space Ape. And it's kind of dark. I mean, I don't find it dark, but people tell me it's dark. I find it quite uplifting. But I think I'm a bit twisted like that.
I mean, have you got that video here?
No, I don't.
You don't have the video?
No.
Okay.
No, it's the video for one of the tracks that's on the album that a couple of art students made for us, which is on my MySpace, if anyone wants to watch it. But it kind of sums up, the video sums up quite well what we're getting at.
Yeah. Shall we have a listen to something off the album?
Yeah. This is the first track off the album. It's called Glass. Inside of this.
So, in terms of vocalists, I mean, is it just Space Ape that you're working with, or have you in the past, or any plans to work with any other vocalists?
I've released a track with a female Jamaican vocalist called Warrior Queen, and I'm doing a track for her album as well.
She did a track with The Bug for...
Yeah, the track that I released was a Bug and Warrior Queen tune.
I mean, tell us a bit about the label Hyperdub. It's been going for how long now?
3 years.
3 years. And I mean, when you first set it up, was it essentially, I mean, did you see it as a label for your own productions?
Yeah, it was specifically for our productions, which I knew were slightly weird and not necessarily going to fit in on other labels. So we didn't really have a plan, just to have an avenue for releasing our own stuff. And then, as kind of naturally happens, you hear other people's stuff that is a bit weird as well, and that you think, that could take it in an interesting direction. So we released the Bug Warrior Queen thing, we released the Burial stuff. Yeah. But you know, it's still there mainly for me to do what I want in terms of production and have an avenue to put it out without having to persuade someone to like it.
I mean, you know, something else that's quite interesting that we were talking about yesterday. I mean, you talk to anyone that runs a label these days, and the news isn't that good. But funnily enough, I mean, your label was actually, your sales have gone up rather than going down in recent time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a big label at all, but you know, it's going in the right direction, and you know, the vinyl sales are going up, which is kind of cool in this day and age. Vinyl sales are going up, the CD sales are great. I think, for some reason, I think vinyl is experiencing a little bit of a resurgence. You know, a lot of people are suffering one way or another, but if you're a tiny label and you're just starting out and you're building it like that, then I think your aspirations are a lot more realistic than perhaps labels that have been around for a long time who have experienced vinyl in a different period of its lifespan and are therefore kind of practically suicidal now because of what's happened to vinyl sales because of digital stuff.
I mean, do you think there's some kind of parallel maybe between, you know, the fact you're talking about how there's a lot of support for vinyl and dubplate culture within dubstep, and young people going to gigs and actually seeing you guys playing off plates rather than Serato or CDs? They're kind of like, you know, you're keeping that whole vibe alive. Do you think that's true to a certain degree maybe?
Maybe. I mean, I think the way scenes grow, there's a lot of cloning that goes on. In other words, people come, they hear the music for the first time, they see what the core of the scene are doing, and then they just copy it. They copy the sound, they copy the mannerisms, they copy the fact that they're using dub plates, and that's how scenes grow. That's just the way music works. That's the way everything works, one way or another. Like the way something grows from being small to being big must involve an element of copying. And so, yeah, I think it does have an impact that we're all crazed dubplate fetishists.
I mean, you know, are you starting to see, there are scenes that have emerged outside of London and outside of the UK, but how about production? Are you seeing much production coming outside of, from far corners of the globe?
Yeah, there's good little scenes in Berlin and New York, and I played in Brazil, and in the next few months I'm supposed to be in Russia and China and Japan and so on. In terms of production, for me, still the best stuff comes from South London, but I've had amazing tracks from Holland recently. There's good stuff coming from Germany, from the US. There's some people in Brazil making stuff. And sometimes you'd like it to be less a copying thing, and for people to bring some of the local flavor of their local music scenes to the music, but maybe that takes a bit of time.
I mean, you're heading out to Russia pretty soon as well.
I don't know what the local music scene would be in Russia.
Yeah. Oh yeah, something else of note with you is, of course, you know, not only a well-respected producer, but also a very well-respected writer. You've been writing a book for a little while now. You're halfway through it. Tell us about this, man. It sounds very interesting.
The book is about, it's really about the uses and abuses of sound systems. So the book's called Sonic Warfare, and it ranges from everything from MCs clashing or sound system clashes, so using sound systems as in this kind of competitive, conflictual situation, or using your vocal cords in that respect, right through to, for example, US military research into acoustic weaponry in Iraq just now. So really that full spectrum of people using and abusing sound systems, people using sound to control or manipulate. So I write a fair bit of stuff about sonic branding. And these things called earworms.
Yes.
Earworms being basically catchy tunes that get stuck in your head, and the more you try and get them out your head, the more they stick. I think we're all, I think musicians know a lot about earworms. And it's kind of weird because a lot of the military research is like science fiction, basically. You can't quite believe that they're
sonic fiction,
attempting to do what they're trying to do with sound. There's a commercially available device in the UK just now called the Mosquito. Don't know if anyone's heard about it. But you can basically buy this device, and shopkeepers are buying it, for example, and they just fit it outside their shop, and it's basically targeted at 15 to 25-year-olds. And it's based on this principle, which is kind of a joke. It sounds like a joke, it sounds like science fiction. But it's based on this principle that as you get older, you lose the higher frequencies in your hearing. And so this device emits, they use these devices apparently to get rid of rats and mice. So they use these devices on groups of youths who are very sensitive to this frequency range between 15 and 20,000 hertz, the upper end of the frequency, audible frequency spectrum. And it's supposed to be so annoying for them that they have to go away, they have to disperse. So it's in a lot of these cases it's about using sound, either very high volume sound or very high frequency sound or very low frequency sound to make people feel uneasy and usually to disperse crowds. So I don't really know if you can. It doesn't sound that realistic to me, but I've got a little test to try out. Basically on one of the websites about this device, the Mosquito, it's got all these test tones from just over 20,000 hertz right down to 10,000 for you to kind of gauge your own hearing and see. My hearing's a bit fucked, so I don't have a lot of high frequency. I can't hear a lot of high frequencies, but I'll play some of these tones and see what people can hear, because the science behind it says that as you get older, you lose the higher frequencies. Therefore, these devices don't affect middle-aged people. They affect kids. And the images, the press release images that are on this website for this commercial device are all of kids with hooded tops on, smoking cigarettes. So I'll just play some of these frequencies and see what people can hear. I don't expect many people to hear this unless there's some closet dogs in here. But this is 22,000 hertz. Rough? No? Anyone hear that? This is 19. You're all too old. 18? You heard that? I couldn't hear that. 16? I could hear that one. So. I couldn't hear that one. So it goes on like that, but that's the principle in which this device is supposed to work. And as I said, it's kind of science fictional, and it makes you wonder, kind of makes you think. You lose contact with the line between science fiction and reality when these devices are being marketed.
Yeah. How long have you been researching the book for?
Oh, quite a long time. It's just something I've been squeezing into a kind of busy schedule for the last few years. Yeah. But hopefully I'll get it finished in the next few months.
Being a producer and going through the whole process of trying to get a record released is one thing, but trying to get a book published is another. You're not looking forward to that part of things?
Yeah, I mean, I set up a record label to cut out the middleman bit of the music industry, but I'm not going to set up my own publishing company.
No.
That would be long.
I mean, another couple of things that, you know, terms I've heard that you've coined or used a bit is this whole thing of ecology of fair. Do you explain, and also base materialism, which sounds pretty interesting. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Very simply, the base materialism thing is, because the book is quite theoretical, and base materialism is kind of like, okay, there's 2,000 years of Western philosophy, and whenever it engages with music one way or another, it's kind of classical music or art music. So base materialism is like dropping a bass bomb on top of Western philosophy and seeing what happens. So that's what that is. What was the other thing?
Ecology of fair.
Yeah, so the ecology of fear is just basically the background to what the book is about, which is particularly post 9/11, when fear is such a dominant mechanism of how politics is working globally. You know, it's just looking into an aspect of that via the way that we've used sound over the last, whatever, 50 years to produce fear. So obviously horror films are a classic example of these kind of shrill sounds, but also, you know, something that comes from dub and reggae culture, the relationship between dread and bass culture. So that's kind of what these things are about.
Yeah, right. Does anyone have any questions at the moment?
Sorry, forgot. Yeah, just to back the story up on your sonic warfare bit there and what you can do to animals with it. There was a massive rat problem in the original Can studio, which was the one where they recorded Tego Mago, Vitamin C, and all that kind of stuff. In like the early 70s, and Holger Czukay went and to get rid of the mice and the rats and turned on one of the oscillators and just on like a really high frequency. And 2 days later, all the animals were gone. And the whole problem was about 4 or 5 days later, the group went through this massive outrage and had one of the biggest arguments, and the group almost had to split up until someone came to the conclusion that the machine was still going, and once they switched it off, it became a happy working place again. It's like,
yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that you get a lot of conspiracy theories about. Like if you search on the net for stuff about acoustic weaponry, you'll hear all these stories about these science labs in the 60s and 70s where suddenly everybody started feeling ill or nauseous in the lab, and you know, nobody could work out why. And then they realized that one of the ventilator fans was emitting these infrasonic frequencies, these really low frequencies. That was basically connecting, because the body is different parts of the body have different resonant frequencies. Your eyeballs will vibrate at a certain frequency, and it would seem like you're having hallucinations, but it's basically that your eyeballs are vibrating, and so you get tracers on your vision, like 18 hertz, something like that. So there's loads of stories of just people having these unexplainable nausea feelings. But the thing is that, you know, when you look at the stuff online, you know, there's a lot of conspiracy theory that surrounds it, so it's quite difficult to separate the reality from the bullshit. Obviously, I think anyone that's kind of interested in bassy music has heard stuff about brown notes. Yeah, the certain low frequencies that are allegedly supposed to make you run to the toilet. What was it? It's called Find My Way, and it's a remix I did of this, I think, ska reggae band called Massive.
For example, in France, in Paris, quite no one know about dubstep, but we are so close from London. How do you explain the fact that, for example, this scene like UK garage or grime, like don't touch a country or a town like Paris, for example?
I don't know. I mean, I've played in Paris a few times, and there was some people there. I think, you know, you tell me, I think French are quite protectionist over there, what comes in culturally to their country.
Yeah, but
because I can only really compare it to places like Germany that are usually quite open to music that comes from London.
Yeah, for example, drum and bass or UK hip-hop like Roots Manuva or the Ninja Tune or the Big Dada or the Warp.
Even though the music's about 6 years old, it's still, in some strange way, quite young. It's 6 years old, but actually it's like a year and a half old because it's gone through a number of changes recently that have made it maybe more accessible or more visible. So I can't explain the Paris thing. I mean, I played there a couple of times and it's been okay.
Any other questions?
I've got two favourite reggae tracks.
Play both of them.
I'll play both of them. This one is from the mid-70s. It's called King Tubby Meets Rockers Uptown. And it's the dub of, it's King Tubby, Augustus Pablo, and Jake. It's a dub of a Jacob Miller tune. Augustus Pablo and the Melodica. I can't get enough of that. And my other favourite kind of reggae-related tune comes from the 80s, and it's actually one of the first digital dancehall tracks under Mislengteng. And I think this tune has got a big influence on dubstep just now.
Aside from the reggae side of things, what else do you listen to a lot of? And I was going to ask, I mean, how about the whole Adrian Sherwood and On You Sound? Because, I mean, if you listen to, you know, like people like Digital Mystics and stuff, there's seems to be a definite kind of influence there.
Yep. Now, I like Adrian Sherwood stuff, but I don't know a lot of it, and it's not I mean, I like African Head Charge as well, but it's not a big, I wouldn't say it's a big influence on what we're doing. I can hear, retrospectively, the connections, but, I mean, the stuff that, apart from jungle, the stuff that I'm influenced by is from everywhere, really. You know, I'm not a dub reggae purist at all, so I kind of draw from everywhere, and my stuff ends up in all different directions.
I mean, before we go, should we have one more of your tunes? Have you got something new and fresh?
Yep.
And are you also finding with the scene? I mean, you know, one of the biggest problems with jungle, with dubplate culture, was tunes getting held up on dub for far too long. Is it a similar thing happening with dubstep, or there's a bit of a quick turnaround?
It's getting faster, but I think, I mean, to be quite honest with you, we're not in any rush. Yeah. You know what I mean? What's the rush? Yeah. I mean, it's getting faster, but everyone's pretty long, so, you know, I think a lot of people have come out of nowhere like, oh, dubstep's getting some press, we better start a dubstep label and do this and do that. But, you know, I've been interested in this music in its various shapes and forms for ages, and it will go on and become something else more interesting after dubstep, so I'm in no rush. Yeah. So you want one of mine or some other? Really?
Well, I tell you what, how about something off the Burial album?
I'd rather play some Wu-Tang.
Yeah.
How much time have I got? Wu-Tang, anyone?
What was the Wu-Tang track you wanted to play anyway?
I really like the film Ghost Dog, and I really like RZA. And This is a quick track. I've got to play it. I'm not having that.
You just come over top of that shit.
In that track.
Yeah.
Hence the horns in this track.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, if you look at your releases, ones you've put up on the platter there, 10-inch. Any particular reason why you release? Do you release the bulky material on 10-inch?
What do you mean the bulky?
What the bulk of it? Like,
I'd release my own stuff on 10-inch. I don't really know why. I like 10 inches.
Yeah.
I mean, I've cut mostly 10-inch dub plates, so it's just a habit.
Yeah.
Really, I don't think the sound is as good on 10-inch, but whatever.
So this track is called?
This track's called Nine Samurai, which is came out earlier this year. It's the track that this video that we were talking about was made for, and it's got a big sample from the Japanese film Seven Samurai, a Kurosawa film, which is the classic example of one of these tunes that kind of unconsciously just got into my head, and then I noticed I was humming it for the next month, and then I realized it, and then I had to go sample it and so on.
A stone will be thrown at the state and a stone will be thrown at the churches. Stone will be thrown at the stage and a stone will be thrown at the churches. At the stage and a stone will be thrown at the churches.
Thank you very much for taking time to have a chat, man. You're gonna be hanging around the Academy for the next couple of days.
Yeah, I'm doing a gig at Croft Institute tomorrow night, and I'm around. I'm working on a track with Tiago.
Nice.
And I'm around.
Okay, so if anyone, and you're a very friendly man, so if anyone has any questions or anything, just come and say hi.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you very much, man.